Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. This video is going to be a little bit of everything. I have some upholstery swatch samples. I've already pulled the board apart and on there were enough fabrics for me to do, I think, 8 bags. We've got squares like this and rectangles as well. So what I've done is pulled apart the samples and then I've grouped them into colours, which I'll show you shortly. The other thing I'm going to be doing in this video is trialling a new, to me, double-sided tape. I've been having a lot of trouble trying to get the So Easy Wash Away tape. I've been using it for years, but there's been changes with suppliers, so I'm trying this new one. Can't roll any further. So the double-sided tape that we're going to be using today is a little bit wider than what I'm used to using. I prefer something even narrower than what I'm used to, but I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to use it throughout this whole project rather than using pins because I want to see how this tape stands up at the sewing machine. A lot of people complain about double-sided tape gumming up their machines. I'm going to use this tape just to put seams together, to put the zips together, all sorts of things. I'll use one needle throughout the project and hopefully this doesn't gum up my needles. I'm hoping that I'm going to have some success with this double-sided tape. I have found a couple of other suppliers as well that I'm looking into, but it's been a real pain trying to get some decent double-sided tape. Hang around, I'm going to show you how I put these square pieces of fabric, I think they're squares, together with the rectangles. We'll make a bag, come along and we'll make these together and test out that tape. When these sample pieces were on their card, they were folded like this in groups. By a stroke of good fortune, I have got enough fabric here to make 7 bags, and they're all going to go together as well. So with these two, for example, now I've already put my labels on what will be the front of each of my bags. So I've got 2 squares and a rectangle for each, and the rectangle is the same width going across. So what my plan is to have that on the bottom, bring it across to the other side and have boxed or curved edged bags. So I'm going to do that, and you can see on this one here, for example, there's the black with a black base and another shade of black there. Then I've got some greys, well, some fawn and grey. These 3 will go together. The aqua or teal will go nicely together. The rust and the orange, and this one's a little bit more boring, but we'll have a cream back base and then the stripy front. I want to do the same bag for all of these pieces of fabric. That way I don't have to worry about thinking or measuring or anything like that. We're not going to worry about the lining just yet. We'll measure that shortly. What I plan to do now is put all of the bags together, the back and front pieces. And if you don't have double-sided tape, then use pins or clips. But as I said, I'm going to be testing this double-sided tape. It's called fabric bond tape. The width of this is about 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So it is a little bit wider than I like, but I'm just going to put this right on the edge of the fabric, and that will be my seam allowance as well. So that'll make the job easier for me. Determine which is the top and the bottom of your bag. This is the right side, and we want to put right sides together. If you decide you're going to make this in, say, a quilting cotton or some other fabric, the fabric dimensions we're starting off with at the moment are 10 inches high by 10.5 inches wide. That is 25 centimetres by 26.5 centimetres. And the narrow strip is 5 inches high by 10.5 inches wide, or 12 centimetres by 26.5 centimetres. So we're going to have 2 of the big pieces and 1 small one for each of these bags. And we'll work out how much we need for the lining and what we need for the zip shortly. These will also be trimmed back as well. If you're using quilting cotton or something with a lighter weight fabric, then you'll need to use some kind of a stabiliser just to give it a bit more structure. I'm going to run this tape right along the very edge of the bottom piece of the fabric. This is my back and that's my front. Take your small piece, place that directly over the top, and now I'm going to do the same with my front piece. This is the bottom at the front. I place some tape along that. We'll place the other long edge of that short piece on the edge of the fabric as well. So they're now ready to go to the machine and be sewn with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance. Set that aside. I'll tape up the rest of them as well now. Okay, I have my sets of 3 all together. I'm going to take these to the machine. I'll sew down both long edges of the fabric to join all 3 together. Once I've done that, I'm going to top stitch. When I top stitch, I like to top stitch to the fabric that has the most colour on it, because that way I can use one thread for everything. So what I'm going to do is sew the 2 side seams, and when I top stitch, this bottom section here will be open and the top stitching toward the front and the back. So we'll go and sew all those together. Okay, I've put a new needle in the machine. I'm using an 18 or 110/18, and the DB1 is the one that's suitable for my machine. Before I started using these needles, and also before I had an industrial machine, I did used to use 14s, 90/14. So you can get away with using those as well. You just have to go slower when you go over the bulk of your seams. I'll put my seam gauge on as well so that I can stay nice and straight. Okay, let's get started. It would help if I put some thread on too, wouldn't it? I'm going to be using a Gutermann Sew-All thread, colour 701. It's just a grey. And now I can get started. I'll grab the next set and sew that in place as well. There's no point stopping at the end of each row. I'll just join the next one on and continue on. It saves a lot more time this way. Okay, that's one row done. I go back to the beginning now and I'll sew the next one on. Start back at the top, and I'm just going to leave everything chained together. Okay, I've sewn 7 sets together, so there's 2 seams on each piece. I'm not sure if you can see my needle here, but can you see the fluff on the needle here? This is where it's actually gumming up. Now, I've never had that happen with the other tape that I use. I'm actually disappointed in that because it's the first time I've had tape that gums up the needle. So it's going to make me a little bit more cautious with the other brands that I'm going to research. I've almost finished the tape that I've got. I'll use it all up, and I'm going to go and top stitch with this needle as well. So I'll continue on as I've planned to, and I'll check my needle again after I've done the top stitching, because the top stitching will be done on the same seams, and it will also be going through that adhesive tape again. So to do the top stitching, I'm going to go back to the beginning, open the fabric out, and remember I said to you I want the seam to face the busiest piece of fabric. I'm not changing thread. I'm going to continue to use the grey thread, and I'll just do a very narrow top stitch, which is about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch, and I'll turn that around and we'll do the same for the other side. We'll fold that seam out to the right so it's away from the center and start again. You'll often see me wiggling my fingers across the fabric, and that's just me making sure that the seam is actually going over to my right. I'm just taking my needle out, and you can see here the build-up of thread that I have. And can you see the thread? It's actually stuck to my needle as well. So that's a little bit frustrating. I really wanted to find a double-sided tape. Well, it's only my first try, so I'm going to keep looking. But this is really tacky. The needle's actually sticking to my finger. So that double-sided tape is not going to be suitable for our needs, is it? So what I've decided to do is to remove that needle completely. I've replaced it with another new needle of the same size, and I'm going to continue using the double-sided tape that I usually use. So I'm going to go back to the So Easy double-sided tape. I'm going to tape up all the zips to the top of the fabric, and we'll go through the whole process again and see if that actually does gum up my needles. I've never seen it happen to mine whilst using that tape, but it's not a fair comparison unless we do both. Okay, so the centre panel has been inserted onto the back and front of each of these bags. And what I've also done to get rid of all of the scrappy threads on the sides, I've trimmed the sides down. The side of my fabric is now 25 centimetres or 10 inches, and the length is 58 centimetres or 23 inches. That means I can cut my lining out at those sizes. So what I've got here is all my lining pieces cut out to the same size as my fabric, and we can keep the lining all in one piece. We don't have to put an opening at the bottom because we'll close it up on the sides. And I've also cut some pocket pieces. The pocket pieces are 25 by 15 centimetres or 10 by 6 inches. And we just need one piece for each bag. The other thing I've done is cut up all my zips. Doesn't matter whether you use regular or continuous zips. I've cut my zips to 23 centimetres in length or 9 inches, and make sure your slider is on. I'm going to do my zipper tabs a little bit differently to the way I usually do, and I have used this technique in previous videos. What I've got is a length of fabric that is 2 inches wide or 5 centimetres, and you want to have at least 3 inches for each zip. So you want to have a tab on each end. All you need to do is take your 5 centimetre or 2 inch width of fabric, fold it in half, fold the raw edges in together, and then fold it in half again. And what we plan to do is put the zipper teeth onto the end of the tab like that, and we'll close up the end of the zips. And with our extra long piece of fabric, I can insert each slide into the side of this cotton tape that I've got here. You can use bias binding as well. I've used that quite often before, but this time around I've just cut a strip of fabric to fit all my zips. I have the tab ends attached to the end of my zip here, and then I have this amount again that will go onto the other side of the zip. So we're going to sew this all the way down, cut that off, and then we'll come around and sew the tape onto the other end. We're going to do that now. So place the tab under your machine, and we're going to sew right on the very edge of the tab there, and when I get to the zipper teeth I'm going to go forward, back and forward. I think I've decided I have trust issues. I always have to secure all these bulky bits. With those all securely in place, we can cut off the tab and apply the rest of it to the other side. And just like the other side, we're going to triple stitch over the section where the teeth are. Okay, the tabs are all in place here. I really actually like doing tabs this way. I like my other technique as well, but these just always look so neat when you've finished sewing them. We can separate those now, and we're going to get ready to put them into our bag. It doesn't matter if your tabs are a little bit wider than your zip. We can trim that back later if you want, but they're going to be hidden away in the lining, so they'll never be noticed. Set the zippers aside for the time being. We're going to get our pockets ready. Fold the length in half, finger press that. We'll take all of these to the machine. We'll leave an opening along this edge here, so across the top and down the sides. Rather than going back and forth, I'm going to go through all these processes at the machine. We'll take the pocket pieces, fold them all in half, sew them closed, leaving an opening. Once I've done that, I'll turn it the right way around, poke out the corners, top stitch the top edge, and then we will attach the pocket piece to one side of the lining. The other thing I have here, because I'm making multiple bags, is a length of fabric that is 9 by 7 centimetres wide or 3.5 by 3 inches. Because I'm making lots of bags, I've got an entire length of fabric here. If you're only going to make the one bag, then all you need is 2 pieces. I'll have that written in your materials list. So what I'm doing is folding the raw edges together. These are going to be tabs for our shoulder straps, and then fold it in half again to close up the raw edges on the inside. Then we're going to sew straight down both long edges. You don't need to worry about the ends. So we'll go and sew all of those pieces together at the machine. I'll start about a third of the way in at the bottom edge, come to the corner and then turn. Flip it over and repeat for the other side. I really enjoy batch sewing. It's a great mindless activity. I don't have to go back and forth between pattern pieces or tutorials. It's just a great mindless activity. I put on my favourite podcasts or YouTube channels, and I'll just listen to those in the background. It's actually a great way to catch up on Chris's videos because he's putting so many out. If you like what I do with my rescued fabrics, then you'll love what Chris does with everything that he does. He rescues everything known to man. It's just a great way to catch up on doing things. Chris's channel is called The Ultimate Recycler. I'll pop a link in the description below. When your pockets are finished, you just want to trim the corners, and then you can turn it the right way around. And once you've turned it the right way, the fold that we have along here, you just finger press that. The opening that we have along here, you can guide the raw edges back inside, finger press that. We will go and top stitch all the folded edges and leave the openings as they are. What I'm going to do to make my life a little bit easier is make a mark on all of the lining pieces so that I don't have to go and pin or measure each individual one. All I'll do is fold it in half on one end, and I'll do that for all of them quickly, just to set a crease so that I know where the centre of the pockets need to go. If you feel that the fabric is a little bit too flimsy, you can actually put some interfacing, lightweight interfacing, on one side of the inside of your pocket as well. These are just crossbody bags, so I don't think they really need it. So when I place my pocket down, it'll be 7 centimetres from the top. I'm going to mark a line on this piece of fabric, but I don't want the line to be seen at the top, just in case I don't remove it. So I'll position the top of the pocket there, and then I'm going to make a mark at the bottom. I am using a pen that fades out with the iron. I've made a mark along the bottom edge of the pocket there, which is around about 7 inches or 18 centimetres from the top. So what I've got is my centre crease, a line marked near the bottom. All I have to do is fold this in half and line up the fabric along the bottom, and I'll cover that line I've drawn, match up the creases, then I can stitch around the pocket. It's much easier than pinning each piece individually. I can just leave everything folded exactly as it is. So then I can just grab each of the folded pieces of lining and make a mark in the centre where I want to line up the bottom of my pocket. So if I just leave everything folded like that, I keep my crease, and then I can just quickly go make my markings. And then we can take all of these pieces back to the machine, finish that top stitching along the top, place the pockets on the lining and sew them together. Okay, let's zip through these pocket tops and get that top stitching done very quickly. So I have the lining piece here. All I need to do is open that up with the centre fold marked. I'll line that up with the centre fold on the lining fabric, and then I'll cover that line that I've drawn. And that should keep everything nice and straight for me to stitch it in place. I usually have all the pocket pieces sitting on my lap and the lining pieces to my side, and as I finish I'll throw one on the floor and grab the next one. This being the fabric that we're going to have for the tabs so that our shoulder straps can be attached to it, we're going to sew all the way down both long edges and then cut it to the size that we need. If you decide that you want to use fabric for your handles, then you'll cut the same dimensions. You might want to stabilize it with something because it's going to get a lot of use over the shoulders. Finish it up exactly the same way as we're doing here. Pockets are done on all of the lining pieces. I've got the strip of fabric ready to be cut to size for the handle tabs. We've got our zips ready and our fabric is all ready as well. So now we can start putting this together. I'll cut each of these tabs down to 7 centimetres or 3 inches. They'll be folded in half. So you want 2 for each bag. I've got some D-rings as well, and what we're going to do here is just place the D-ring onto each of the little tabs, and then they will be placed onto the outside of our bag. Let's grab this one here. Now we need to put a zip in along the top, and we're also going to put these tabs along the top. So the aim is to have a crossbody bag with the tabs coming out at the top right next to the zip, but we're going to have one on each side of the bag. From the outside edge, we're going to measure 4 centimetres or 1.5 inches, and that will be the placement for one of our tabs. And flip the bag over, and on the back we'll do the same. So I've marked 4 centimetres or 1.5 inches. So this is how our bag straps are going to look. Now we need to get our zip on as well. Before I actually put my tabs on, I'm going to put the double-sided tape onto the back and front of each of my bag pieces. And this time around I'm going to use that wash away quilter's tape by So Easy, which is what I've used for years, just so that we can do a proper comparison between the two tapes. Peel off the paper, we'll grab the tab and place that next to that mark I made, so it'll be 4 centimetres from the outside edge. I'll leave that for the moment because we're going to be sewing one side of the zip first. Then we need to put our zip down. The curved edge of your zip slider will be facing the front left, and then you'll centre that over your fabric, making sure that you've got an even seam allowance on either side, and press it in place. And when we sew the zip, we'll be sewing along here and you'll have that tab inserted nicely in the top edge. Grab your lining. So I have the pocket section which will go to the back and nothing on the front section. So just flip this over. We'll run some double-sided tape along the top here, or you can run it along your lining, and since the lining is what's sitting flatter, I'll use that. Peel the paper off and we'll line that up along the top edge. Line up the side edges and then press down. I will just clip that in place because there's a fair bit of bulk there with the tab, and we'll take all those layers to the machine and sew that down. And you just want to double check that you've got the right side facing up of your lining and the right side facing up of your fabric, and the pocket will sit on the back side. So for each of the bags now, I'm going to put the tabs on, put the zip on, and prepare that for sewing. The first thing I'm going to do now that I've got all my bits ready is place double-sided tape onto the top edge of all of the bag pieces. So that includes the main fabric and the lining. I'll apply the double-sided tape to both sides rather than coming back and doing it later. Saves fiddling around with it all. All right, now that the tape is ready on all of the bags, I'll put the handle tabs on one side of each, then I'll put the zips on as well. I try to keep the front facing me so that I know that I can get my zips all in the same order. Not that it really matters if the slider ends up opening the other way. Nobody puts their handbags over their shoulders in, the right way or the left way. When I place my zipper down, I do just eyeball it. I've got a good gauge on the side whether or not it's going to be even. It saves a little bit of time not having to measure for every single bag. You'll notice that I'm not actually measuring the position of the tabs as well. I line up the fabric with the cutting mat at the back. That gives me the measurement that I need. And again, that saves me a lot of time in having to measure each individual bag. When putting the lining in place, I line up the outside edges first and then I'll press the rest of it in together. So as long as everything lines up on the sides, it'll make it easier to sew the side seams later. Then you can just finger press and manipulate everything to sit nice and flat along the top edge. Okay, we've now got our pieces ready to go to the machine. Sew all the way down the edge with the zipper foot, and when we go over the section where the tabs are here, I'll backstitch over that as well, just to give it a little bit more reinforcement, because that is going to be a stress point when we use our bags. You might see the little bump there. We've got about 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch on the side there. That will become our seam allowance later. So that tab that we've built on the end of the zip will be nicely finished on the top of our bag. Let's go to the machine. Now is when we're going to test this needle to see if there's any build-up of sticky residue from the Sew Easy tape that I've been using for years. I've never noticed it before, but we'll see if anything builds up on this needle. Sewing the zip in place is the perfect time to use up all of those old bobbins, also to get rid of any thread that you no longer want, and even just the ends of reels that you have. This part that we're doing is really good for getting rid of that thread, and none of the stitches or the thread will be seen after we've done the top stitching. Perfect place to hide it all. I sew all of my pieces with the heavier fabric at the top and the lining at the bottom. Okay, this is when you find out whether or not you've put everything in the right order. So we've got our tab secured in place, the zip in place there, the correct side of the lining, which will line up with the other side. And we need to put the other side of the zip on, but before we do that, we're going to top stitch. This is going to be a difficult bag to top stitch when we do the other side. So whilst everything is still open, we're going to take this back to the machine. We'll top stitch from the edge of the tab to the other edge of the tab. We don't need to go all the way to the very end of the fabric. So we'll go back and do that now. What you want to do is make sure that the lining and the main are both pulled away from the zip, and the tab here needs to be sitting up as well. You don't want to sew that down. You want to make sure that is up and over the zip. So that's where, if you didn't remember to triple stitch on the other side, it won't matter because it's getting top stitched in place here. So I just have the whole lot sitting on my lap now, and I'll grab each one and then I'll just ease the lining and the main fabric away from the zip as I'm sewing. I've also gone back to using the same colour thread that I used for my top stitching earlier. In this project, I feel like I'm chopping and changing with my threads quite often, but that's because I'm only doing about 8 bags at a time. Most of the time I might do 30 to 50 bags in one go. I also have the other machine beside me that I will use for handles and labels, for example. That also means I don't have to change my thread constantly. You might have noticed that I'm triple stitching over the tabs as well. I really just can't help myself. And our top stitching is finished for one side of the bag. So for the other end of the bag, we'll do the same that we did before. Put the tab in place, put the zip in place, and then put the lining on top. Bring the other end of the bag over, line up the sides, and then you'll bring your lining on top and line that up as well. I always struggle to find things to say at this point, so whilst I'm speeding up the video, it's a little bit boring for you guys just to sit there and watch it. I do struggle to think of something constructive to say. I get a terrible urge to sing, and trust me, you do not want to hear me sing. But if you think I should put some music in these segments, let me know. I know a few people have commented that they really like that I don't put music in. So if you'd rather me stay quiet or put music, let me know. Now we can go and finish the other side of the zip. Then we have to top stitch that side as well. It's going to be the most complicated process of the whole lot because it's a little bit fiddly, but I'll show you what to do shortly. Again, I'll start at the outside edge, back stitch at the beginning and the end. I've got my zipper foot on, and if I remember, I'll triple stitch over the area where the tabs are for the bag straps, and I'll also try to remember to keep my lining faced down. Even though I've taped everything, the lining still can have a tendency to shift. That's why I like to have the heavier fabric on top. Okay, the zip has been completely installed, and all we need to do is the top stitching on the side that we've just completed. You can see the tabs are on either side of the bag and evenly spaced at each end. Now that we have to top stitch, it's going to get quite difficult to do that on the machine, but it's doable. Open out your zip, and what we have to do is turn the bag inside out. It's easier to sew when it's inside out, and you'll just have to move the top section out of the way. We're only having this problem because we've got no bottom seams. If you had joined the fabric, we would be doing that last. Take the top section out of the way, and you just have to feed this under your machine and manipulate the fabric as you go. So you'll start here at the end of the tab, sew along, and you just keep on going, all the while moving the fabric out of the way as you sew, and just making sure that your lining is out of the way as well. It's quite fiddly. It'll be difficult for you to see whilst I'm at the machine. When you get to the other end, you'll place your tab over the zip and continue on until you get to the end of the zipper tab here. You've just got to hold your tongue the right way. I'll turn all my bags inside out now, and then I'll have everything ready when I get to the machine. Of course, you'll want to open your zips all the way, and we'll be keeping them open for the rest of the bag. Now, as I said, this section is a little bit fiddly. This is the only drawback to having one piece of fabric for the back and front all connected. I don't sew all the way to the end. I'll stop at the end of that zipper tab. And then the top stitching for that section is done. Now, I'm not going to make you sit around and watch me do the rest of it. It's going to take quite a while because it is very fiddly. So I'll just go ahead and do those, and I'll be with you shortly. Okay, the top stitching is done on all of the bags. What we need to do now is make sure our zips are open. So if you haven't already got them open them up and leave them that way. And we'll turn this inside out, but we'll separate the lining and the main for all of our bags. We're at the tail end of this project now, so there's not too much more to go. Normally we'll have our opening at the bottom here. We're going to have it at the side of the lining. So when you line this up, we've got our zipper tab here, and we've got that 1 centimetre seam allowance. So I usually just push the tab to the lining side. I'll line up the folded edge of the main, and all the seams are facing the folded edge. And on this end here, where we've got the small piece of fabric and these ones top stitched, we'll line that up as well. Now, in hindsight, what I should have done was top stitched one seam going this way and the other seam going that way. And had I done that, I would have a much flatter seam along here. It's not going to make much of a difference. I can live with that. Now you can see that tab at the top here. We're not going to be sewing over this at all, so that's why we've made a nice folded finish on the end there. When we do sew, we've got our 1 centimetre seam, so we'll be sewing right next to that. If you find that that's too difficult to sew, you can actually come in a little bit. That's why we've left such a big seam allowance, because it just gives us a little bit of wiggle room. So just try and sew as close as you can to this tab without stitching on it. What you can do with your machine, if you don't have a really narrow foot, is move the needle position further over to the left so that you can get the needle closer without having to worry about not having the right foot. Do exactly the same at the other end. I'll just push that tab toward the lining, line up the folded edge of the fabric, and at this side. And if it doesn't quite line up, if one piece of fabric is a little bit more warped than the other, I tend to just ease it as I'm sewing. So I popped a couple of clips in here just to remind me that I need to leave an opening. When I sew this bag, I'll start on the main section of the bag, and I'll actually put my needle down into the fabric. By putting the needle down, it means when you're going forward and back, it's not going to shift the layers. So that'll secure that. I will go all the way down to the other end, and then I'll also sew this end as well. Once I've done those, that's when I'll come around and I'll sew the lining in place. Then I can just reinforce this section here. The fabric isn't going to shift, and it's going to give me nice corners at the top of my bag. So I have all of my bags clipped at the zip and at the folded edge. The rest of it I'll just leave as is, and hopefully I'll remember to leave an opening for turning through. So I've put my presser foot down to hold the fabric in place, and I'll put my needle into the fabric. And there's quite a lot of bulk in the fabric here. So if you're using a domestic machine, just go slowly. Use a hump jumper if you've got one. I'll do a back stitch here, and then I'll go to the other end. Flip it over and do the same for the other side. You'll notice I still have paper in some of these. It's not a problem, it'll never be seen. Once that's done, we can do the lining. I'll start again where I've actually sewn on the outside of the fabric. That way it'll just reinforce that section. I'll come down probably about 3 or 4 fingers width and backstitch. Then I'll leave an opening of about 4 or 5 fingers. You want to leave enough of an opening so that you can turn your fabric through. Backstitch again. And again on the other side. And on this side you can sew all the way to the end. It probably seems like I'm doing extra work starting at the top of the bag and coming around and doing the same thing 4 times essentially, but it means that I'm not going to have the fabric shifting at the top, so that little bit of extra time it takes is a lot more valuable to me than having dodgy corners. Now I'm not going to take you with me to do the rest of them. I think you get the idea, don't you? So now that we've finished the top stitching for all of the bags, we've done the same amount of seams and top stitching for one needle as we have for the other, and we can now make a comparison between the 2 double-sided tapes. So you can see the build-up of thread or fabric that's stuck to the needle here. That was with the first lot of tape, and you can also see in the channel of the needle there. I'll try and get a really good close-up. Applying this needle to that one I can feel the sticky residue in there, but you can also see the thread fibres inside that little channel there. So it's quite interesting that this one has such a big build-up of thread and this one here doesn't. I'm just going to try and find that same channel, which is right along here, and I can just glide along nice and smoothly. On the inside there's no fabric or thread stuck there, yet this one here, I can't go any further because it's really gummed up. And to touch, well, I don't have the needle sticking to my fingers like I did with this one, but it was interesting that I've got all of this excess thread up here, and inside the channel of the needle. I think it's called the scarf, correct me if I'm wrong. So my quest for the perfect double-sided tape continues. I'll continue with the Sew Easy only whilst I have some in stock, but I do need to find another supplier. At least I can still use this needle. Okay, we're nearly finished. I was going to put darts in the bottom of my bag, but it's going to be a little bit awkward given that we have folds at the bottom. So for these crossbody bags, we're just going to have boxed corners. I will normally take these to the machine and box them as I go, but if you don't want to do that, all you need to do is measure 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters from the stitching line and follow that down from the fold. And you have to measure that from that stitching line, otherwise you're not going to have the right size boxed corner. And you'll repeat that for all of your corners at both ends. So there's a couple of things you can do here. You can either mark all 4 corners of both sides of your bag, or you can take it to the machine and do it in one go. If you want to do this in slow progressive steps, you can cut out this box, and even though we've cut out 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch, that's not the size of our corner. We still have a seam allowance of about 1 centimeter, whatever it is you've chosen to do. So your boxed corner is actually going to be bigger than that cutout that we've got. So just keep that in mind. Whatever measurement you've decided on your boxed corner, it's going to be doubled over the base of your bag, and it will also reduce the height of your bag by the same amount. So if you choose to cut them out, spread it open, line up the edges, and you can either press the seam to one side or press the seams open. It's completely up to you. Or if you want to, instead of cutting the boxes out, you can keep the fabric together and match up the corners that you've drawn. So you've got the same thing at each end, just different ways of doing the steps. And if you choose not to mark your squares, then you need to find a guideline on your sewing machine. Open out your fabric. This is the center bottom, or the fold line at the bottom. Open it out. And this line that we've got, or the fold, needs to line up with the straight edge of the side of your bag. Again, your seams can go any way you like, whether you want to open them or have them go to one side. It's completely up to you. And you'll take that to the machine and you'll sew the measurement that we've got on this side here. So we'll take this to the machine and I'll show you how I line that up, because all of my bags will be done at the machine. I'm not going to use up all the time marking my corners when it's a lot easier to do it at the machine. Let's go. So let's do this one first that we've actually cut. Back stitch at the beginning and the end. This one here, we haven't cut that little tail off, so we'll sew that one as well. And I'm going to sew this beside the line that I've drawn. Otherwise, I'll end up having a different size box corner to the other side. So that one there has been sewn with my seam allowance. This is the one that's been cut off and then sewn with my seam allowance. Now I'm going down the other end and I've got that fold line there. Bring the fabric apart. I'll line up this seam with that fold line. So I want that to be nice and straight. And then I've lined up the corner with the edge of my seam gauge. Because it's upholstery fabric, I'll double stitch this. So this seam and this one are going to be the same size. So 3 different ways of doing your box corners. They're all going to work, just depends on the speed with which you want to do your corners. And I am going to do all of mine using a guide on my machine. And when they're all done, I can just cut that off. Whatever you choose to do is fine. I will go now and do all of mine using a measurement on my machine. I'll probably reduce that a little bit and use the 3/4 inch line on my machine here. It's a little bit easier for me to follow. So what I've done here is folded the corner. I've got my 3/4 line here, and I'll use that instead. The size of your box corners is completely up to you. All right, all the boxing is done for all of the bags, and all you need to do now is trim off the little ears that you've got. You do that, oh, that one's not done. Do that for both ends of your bag. This is a much quicker way of doing your corners than measuring out all the corners, cutting everything out, then boxing everything. Trimming these ears off at the end is much quicker. And then once you've finished trimming off all those little corners, just stick your hand in, bring the right side out and through the hole. You'll do this for all of your bags. Poke out all your corners as well. Double check that everything looks right, and if you're happy with everything once it's turned the right way around, then you can go to the side seam and close up the opening on the side. But check your work before you've done that. When you're neatening up the corners at the top, you just want to stick your thumb in the corner of the bag, push out that tab that you've got on the end there, make sure that sits nicely, and on the other end. And if you're happy with all of that, then you can turn the lining out and close it up. So far that's how our bag is looking. We've got our tabs at the top there on either side for a handle, and we're going to be doing our handles shortly. I'll quickly go and close up all those bags, then we'll prepare our bag straps. Okay, we've finished all of the bags now. The only thing that's left for us to do is the handles. So before I show you the finished bag, let's make some handles. But before we do that, one thing I've done here is used D-rings. I shouldn't have used D-rings. It's actually much easier to use these rectangular rings. Unless you're going to put swivel clips, you're better off putting these rectangular rings. So that was an oversight for me. I should have thought about that earlier, but in my defense, I did think I was going to put clips on the handles. There's no need. These are the rings I should have put on my tabs. What we do need are these adjustable sliders. I've got 7 bags. I've only got 6. Hopefully I've still got one at the shop, so I'll finish that tomorrow. But let's get on to these. If you want to make your own handles, that's fine. Use the same width that I'd mentioned earlier for these tabs. Then you've got matching straps and tabs. What I'm using is the polypropylene webbing. It's really strong, and I use this for all of my bags. It's a lot more cost effective because I don't have to waste time making shoulder straps. 1 inch wide or 2.5 centimeters, 60 inches long, 1.5 meters. We need the slides. They're the same width as your fabric. Place your strap inside the ring, over the centerpiece and back through. Then the edge here, we'll fold that over by about 2.5 centimeters and then fold it over again, which is about 1 inch, and have that fold sitting inside the strap there. This can be sewn in place. What I will do with this is sew across here, down, across and up again. If you want to, this is where you can do your crosses. So we'll do that for every one of our straps. You don't have to measure that fold. It's just whatever you want it to be. Okay, let's go back to the machine and we're going to sew a square around these ends here. Then we'll be ready to put this onto our bags. Okay, the handles are now ready to put onto our bag. Where the folded edge is here, which is the wrong side of the handle, have that faced up. Take the other end of your strapping and place that through your ring. Now this is the front of my bag, so I'm going to place the handle through the back of the ring and up along. You see the handle is still nice and straight, and I've still got the wrong side facing up, and it's come up through the back of the ring, and bring this edge up through one side of that slide. So that sits nice and flat, and then you'll just continue that unstitched edge through to the other side. Okay, so that's fully adjustable now. And then have that sitting nice and flat. Follow the strapping around until you come to the other side and loop this through the ring from front to back. So we've got the front of the bag and we're coming out of the ring from the back of the bag. Then you just fold that over and stitch it in place. Before you sew that last bit, you just want to make sure that your strapping is nice and flat along here, that it continues to be nice and flat, so that'll sit properly over the shoulder. And that you want the buckle here facing up as well, or facing the outside of the bag. Once you've got all of those bits right, clip it together and you can sew that at the machine as well. So I'll show you one more time. With my buckle here, I'll face the folded edge up, find the other end, bring that from the underneath, feed it through, find that end, bring that through the buckle, through the other side of the buckle, sits nice and flat, and again from front through the back and fold it over. Now that all the bags are done, I'm going to sew that last bit of strapping in place. It's usually at about this point my back is killing me. I've hunched over the machine way too long. Small doses, I know, but that never happens, does it? I've swapped over to my narrow foot because that just means I can get a little bit closer to the D-ring. And that is all of the bags finished. Can I just say, as tedious as it sometimes is to get rid of all the paper from the back of the swatches, I just love working with them. I get the opportunity to have bags in my store that I know nobody else has. These are all, one-off fabrics from the sample swatches that I have, and customers know that there's not going to be another one out there like it. So I really love that about the swatch samples. So the shoulder straps are completely finished. As you can see, they're adjustable as well. I was going to put swivel clips on the bottom of them, but I figured the shape of this bag doesn't really warrant you carrying it like a wristlet, so I've left them as a proper shoulder strap. I think these ones might be popular in the store because they've got the zip going right across the top. I've done some previously that have a magnetic snap, and I've also done some that are a lot smaller as well, and they've been selling, but I think these ones have got much more room in them, so I reckon they'll do much better. I can't remember what price I sell the other ones in the shop. They must be $30 or $35. These ones here, there's a bit more hardware on there, more length in the strapping, so I'm going to price these out at either $35 or $40 in the shop. I'll see how they go. We're back at work today, so we've got a busy weekend planned in the shop, and hopefully I might actually get to sell some. And what did you think about my experiment with the double-sided tape? I found it really interesting that the new one that I was trying out gummed up my needles so much that my fingers actually stuck to it as well, and the thread kept coming up too. I found also that I couldn't even thread the eye of the needle because there was gum inside the eye. So I did find that really interesting. I'm disappointed that the So Easy tape that I've been using for years is so hard for me to get now. I buy wholesale, so I don't want to buy retail. I'm still on the hunt for decent double-sided tape, and I'm going to try a couple of other brands soon. I'm also asked in almost every video, how do I remove the paper from the back of the fabric? I have done a couple of videos. I'll pop a link in the description or up in the corner. But the best success I've had to get the paper off the fabric is with that heat press I received a few months ago, or a very hot iron. I've tried washing them, I've tried soaking them, I've tried freezing, I've tried chemicals, I've tried all sorts of things. The best method I've had is a very hot iron. But sometimes the papers just don't come out. Speaking of, remember that swatch book that I asked you about a few weeks ago? I haven't forgotten it. I just can't get the paper out. It's been a nightmare, so I'm still working on that. I hope you've enjoyed this video and making these bags. Will you make them? Isn't that fabric gorgeous? Just love it. Let me know if you guys make them. Catch you next time.